All right, everyone. So this is the first start of the evening session. We had 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening. This next hour is going to be time with Tim Connors, and I'll lead off a lot of the Q&A in the beginning, and we'll do the same type of structure too. So you guys, as you hear comments and you have questions, feel free to use the chat, and I'll moderate as I can as we're going through it. And DJ help me keep honest with time. And once this is done, you guys are then going to move into a small group session. So all of your spiritual formation teams, you're going to be able to meet and convene for an hour, and that's all going to be facilitated. And then you're going to reconvene with all of us, and John Cavadini, who heads up the McGrath Institute of Church Life campus, is going to talk and share some notes from the called and co-responsible conferences that they've been doing. And we'll close out with prayer, and that's the official launch day. So that's our agenda for the rest, and that's what gets us to close out. And our next session that we're going to be doing with you guys is actually this Friday too. So we'll be able to have another Zoom session, and that will start the recurring Monday, Wednesday, Friday sessions after that. And just for housekeeping, remember Notre Dame email forms, set up time with your weeklies with your coach, and also when you're convened, John will describe more, but just make sure you have small groups. All right. So without further ado, I present Tim Connors. So Tim Connors, I am really privileged to personally be able to present because Tim has been a mentor to me over the last few years. So even when I got my MBA at Notre Dame and graduated back in 2015, I was reaching out to him with questions and advice, and he was drawing on his. And so Tim Connors' experience comes from the venture capital world. He is the founder and general partner at Pivot North Capital, and that's an early stage software focused venture capital firm based in Menlo Park, California. So that's what he's doing now. If you look up LinkedIn, that's where he's at. Some of the amazing success that he's been a part of is $3 billion exits. So these 3 unicorns, this is a massive achievement to do one. It's wonderful to hear and meet from someone who's done 3. And another accomplishment recently, Tim was named one of the top 100 VCs in the world on the Midas list. So he's also publicly recognized by some of these accolades, some of these accredited organizations to be able to say this is a sage to listen to. Some of that experience that he has that he brings to Pivot North, he gained at Sequoia. So he was there for 12 years apprenticing. And even before that, Tim was receiving a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Notre Dame, a master's degree in electrical and computer engineering from Stanford, and an MBA from Harvard Business. And I know last time, if you guys saw the YouTube, Brian gave good ribbing on which was the best school that he got a degree from. So that's
spent a lot of money on tuition.
Yeah. And I'd also say that personally, Tim has just been a huge partner of the Idea Center. So there's been a lot of our startups that Tim has counseled. And like I mentioned, some of my startups, Tim's actually given me advice that has been hugely valuable. And he has that ability to give hard truths well. And as you guys are entering into an accelerator, that is some of the best that you can get right now. So as someone who just cares passionately about his faith, his craft, and the University of Notre Dame, this is why we wanted Tim to come in, talk to you guys all today. All right, so Tim, some of this is in a way a recap of the conversation you and I had earlier, but it's also a chance for me to ask questions I haven't been able to ask you before. So I laid out the resume, what I can see on LinkedIn. But what I can't see LinkedIn is almost the color and the personal anecdotes about how you got to where you are and the faith component of a lot of that. So if you wouldn't mind just walking us through a little bit of your history and just tell us how your spirituality informed it, because here at the OSV Innovation Challenge, they're spending equal time on spiritual formation and lean startup techniques. So we'd love just to hear how you have found a way to wed those together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun. I did engineering for a number of years, and then I started doing venture capital. And I originally thought that my work life and my faith life were 2 completely separate things. And if you spend much time in Silicon Valley, there's not a lot of moral compass based decision making that permeates everything in Silicon Valley. So not hard to think that way since I've spent my whole career out in the Valley. And what was interesting as I progressed, it became more and more clear to me that all of the things you learn in church and from mom and dad teaching your faith are things that are super relevant and helpful in solving unmet needs in startups. So there's kind of three factors I care about a lot in my founders: smarts, goodness, and grit. So startup founders have to be really smart. Startups are high risk, and you have a very short period of time to figure out what's working and what's not. And so you just need a very fast motor. You got to just learn faster than the average person. Grit, when the going gets tough, do your legs stop and do you quit? Or do the legs just keep driving? And if you're coached properly, the only reason why a startup ever fails is because the founder quits. So grit's a big factor. And then goodness is probably the king of the three. So empathy and self-awareness and a really strong moral compass to make good decisions when nobody's looking. So startups are ultimately an act of empathy. You're putting yourself in the shoes of a potential customer with an unmet need and trying to solve that need. You're putting yourself in the shoes of great, talented people you're trying to attract to your company. And then you're trying to build on that with your strengths and weaknesses. So self-awareness is critical. And then in startup land, there's so much that happens behind the scenes on a day-to-day basis that as an investor in startups, I really need founders with well-developed moral compasses so they do the right thing when nobody's looking. So as I've progressed and looked for those skills, it's interesting to watch as you develop your own skills in those areas, and it all ties together really nicely. And ties it all back together. So now I thought I'd make some extra money and then give it away. And then I started getting involved in Catholic social services and Catholic tech startups. And then that started influencing my day job. So now a bunch of my day job investments are influenced by that purview that I got from being involved with the vulnerable. So it's pretty fun how it's all just absolutely merged together.
And so Tim, one of your comments is the moral compass is something you look for. How, and you're also kind of in a land that tends to lack it in many capacities. How do you identify it? How does it surface, and where are the friction points where you find that someone doesn't have it? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's the more I can invest in folks that I know well, or that are well known to somebody that I know well, the better. Because there's nothing like experience with somebody over thick and thin to know what they're like when the going gets tough. And then they get to know you and I get to know them. And so it's a win-win if I don't stray too far from my own network. When you find organizations that are incredibly good filters, you can use that as a proxy. So it's fun. Notre Dame actually, if you look at what they screen for on admissions for undergrads, it aligns. They don't use all the same terminology, but it aligns very, very much to smarts, goodness, and grit. So there's a lot of just implied trust I can have with folks that come from Indy. Mm-hmm. So I end up working with a lot of domers. I'm sure the same's true of a lot of the other Catholic universities. I have less experience there, but so it's not a perfect way to get a screen, but you try to do the best you can on the team going in, and then it's a lot of fun when you get it right, and it's no fun at all when you miss on the goodness factor. It makes for a long 6 to 8 years of working with another.
So, and Tim, one of the things you were just talking about, it sounded like there was a progression of experience you had where it started with donations, then it moved to service, and then it moved more towards what your day job's like. Could you just talk a little more about what that progression looked like?
Yeah. So all day, every day. My day job is I try to find tremendous founders who have identified an unmet need in the world, and hopefully an unmet need that really matters. And then they're all focused on what their solution is to that unmet need. But I don't worry about it too much because 99% of the time it's wrong, either slightly or in a big way. But if you have the right founder and you get the unmet need right, you can usually iterate your way to the right answer. And so, great founder and unmet need is what is where my energy focuses. And then from there, I just coach and iterate with them. So iterate, measure, iterate, measure, iterate, measure. So I've been doing that for forever, and it gets into your blood where it's hard to live your life without constantly thinking about where the unmet needs are and how things could be better. Mm-hmm. So you need very patient spouses and kids because you're constantly talking about how the world could be better than it is. So I've been doing that forever. And what happens is as you have success, you start getting invited onto all kinds of different boards and things, and they want your opinion, but they kind of want your money. But by having the ability to give some money, you get to have probably more influence with your opinion than you maybe have earned. So you start going on boards. So I started going on boards of nonprofits and a bunch of Catholic related nonprofits, and parish council at my parish, and finance council at my parish, and finance council of the archdiocese, and the board of Catholic Charities in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting was every time I look for, once you find the right founder and the right unmet need, then you're iterating your way to, kind of three things: happy customers, customers that come back over and over again because they love the service, and then unit economics that work well. So you can reach the customer and have them pay you far more than it costs you to reach them. So if you get those three things right in a startup, then everything ends up working well. And so I started to bring that same methodology to everything else I was doing in the nonprofit world, all my work at Notre Dame, all my work at Catholic Charities. And what was interesting is you realize the exact same methodology works for any type of organization. Mm-hmm. But the nonprofits that I got involved with, I kept seeing ways that they could leverage technology in a much more effective way and do their service much, much better with at least a light, and in some cases a heavy technology component to them. So then you start figuring out, okay, we can teach financial literacy at Catholic Charities San Francisco mm-hmm. by rounding up a ton of people, a ton of our clients, put them in a room and teach them budgeting. But it's very, it's one-on-one combat. It's not scalable, mm-hmm. and it doesn't really work that well. There's more families in America that are struggling financially every year, despite billions of dollars being granted to do financial literacy training. So in my day job, I funded this company that now is a pretty big company called Chime.com. It's a consumer bank. And instead of Wells Fargo, B of A, and Chase stealing $500 a year from the poor families in America in the form of monthly bank fees and overdraft, we just decided to build a bank and built it online. So by not having all the bricks and mortar locations, we were able to run much more efficiently, which allowed us to not have to charge fees or overdraft to the customers. And so now I think it's up to 8.5 million accounts now, about a 6.5 billion valuation privately, where we're helping an incredible number of families save $500 a year when 2/3 of the US population struggles to save $500. So you had two different approaches to the same problem: financial literacy or financial viability for poor families. Mm-hmm. In one case, you were applying a nonprofit-based approach that really hasn't shown any effectiveness. And then we applied a technology-based approach, and it's working incredibly well and also delivering, doing well while doing good. It's a highly profitable business model. So you start to see those things, and then you start to realize that the unmet needs are the same. It's just being attacked in a very different way, whether it's a nonprofit attacking it or a for-profit attacking it.
Yeah. And I remember one of the things in one of the things you're describing now is you developed a pattern recognition that you used in different environments, these being an example. One of the things you discussed in our last call too was almost a new framework that you were introducing me to, which is just basically how do we add safety and vibrancy to the church at its most fundamental levels. And so just talk a little bit about that. Like, how did you start identifying the needs within the church environments that you were in too, that might benefit from the same types of solutions?
Yeah, I got to grab my computer charger here real fast.
Okay.
So, sorry, can you repeat your question for me?
Yep. Pattern recognition helped you in your nonprofit work. You also started using a framework that you were describing to me earlier, which was that the church is made up of essentially families and parishes. So start talking to me a little bit about that framework and then how you've started identifying big needs in that world too.
Yeah. So in startups, I mentioned there's three big things. So you got to have the right founder who's identified a clear unmet need. And then it's great you guys are in this program, because the most important thing once you have a founder and unmet need is to find the right founder coach to be able to coach you through these things. There's nothing like having a good coach who's been through it to be able to help guide you. So once you have that, then you kind of go to work, and the steps are pretty simple. And I have a write-up I can share with John, who can share on to folks. It goes into more detail on this, but what I try to think about is every startup ultimately has a customer who has that unmet need, and it's one of their most important unmet needs they have in their life. So if you can get some early happy customers, that's step one. So there's a thing called Net Promoter Score, NPS. You can ask people how likely they are to refer your product or service to others. If you go on a flight on United Airlines, you'll get one right after you land asking you that question. It's used everywhere. And so what you look for there is who are raving fans of your product and who are big detractors of your product. And the relative ratio of those matters a lot. So if somebody loves your product, says they're very likely to refer their friends and colleagues to your startup, then you ask them why they love it so much. And you can use that in your marketing. And then those that say, there's no way in the world, I strongly disagree that I would refer this startup to my friends and colleagues. And those are your detractors. And then you ask them why, and they tell you what's broken. And so what they tell you is what you can go to work to fix in your product. And so NPS is a great way to measure happy customers. So that's step one. Then step two is getting customers to come back over and over and over again. So every once in a while you can build a good business where customer buys once and goes away and never comes back. Most great businesses, the customer uses the product on a very, very regular basis. And so you want to look really carefully at retention. So how does, if a customer comes on once, do they stay around for a long time? And so there's this thing called a retention asymptote chart where you monitor the months since acquisition and see what percentage are still around in month 4, month 5, month 6, month 7. And what you'll see is you'll have a bunch of early customers, and then it asymptotes down to your super loyal customers. And you want to make sure that loyal customer percentage is high enough. So if you have happy customers as measured by your Net Promoter Score, and then you have high retention as measured by your retention asymptote charts, and I can send you through John a summary of all this in more detail. Then the third step is, can you get the unit economics to work and to scale? And at a high level, what that means is if you have, if a customer is willing to pay you X or X per month for your product or service, can you get it to them? Can you sell it to them for far less than what they're willing to pay you? and this is probably 99% of whether startups succeed or fail, is they can get some early happy customers and they get some customers sticking around, but then they never quite get the unit economics working. So if you think about those three steps, happy customers that stick around and the unit economics work, then every startup becomes easier to analyze. And so you analyze them on those metrics. So with every startup, we're trying to figure out, when you get to unit economics, is what's your unit of investment in getting customers. So if you're a software company selling software to enterprises, your unit of investment is in a software sales rep. If you're a direct-to-consumer business, your unit might be a single customer and the investment is in Facebook ads. So how many dollars of Facebook ads does it cost you to get a customer to come to become, how many dollars of Facebook ads does it cost to get a customer? And then you look at how long that customer sticks around and how much gross margin you make per month from that customer. And you want to make sure if you spend X to get a customer, you get 2X in gross margin in a reasonable amount of time. So that's how that's the framework in which you think about it. Mm-hmm. In the church, it's really interesting because the church is very much organized around kind of two units. One unit is the family. So if families are healthy, there's a better chance a parish is going to be healthy. And if the parishes are healthy, the diocese can be healthy and the Vatican can be healthy. So it's really that unit of the family and then the unit of the parish. And if you look at the safety and vibrancy of the family and the safety and vibrancy of the parishes, it's not hard to figure out both why we have so many issues that we have in the church, but also tons of unmet needs that folks can go and solve by focusing on those units. So doing a ton of work with different folks and coaching a lot and doing some grants and doing some investing through our family foundation in a variety of different efforts that try to go to the core of helping the family be safe and vibrant and helping the parish be safe and vibrant. And then doing that in a way, given my background, where we leverage technology wherever possible, mm-hmm. so that what we find that works in one parish can more easily be replicated into all 17,000 parishes in the US.
And Tim, your definition of technology, is that software or is it broadly defined as things, or what's the limit of that definition?
Could be anything. These days, there's a ton of innovation going on in the software layer, which is really nice. Lots of unmet needs that can be solved with software.
Yeah.
There's some cool efforts, like I saw the electronic rosary coming out of Italy for being able to pray the rosary with each other. So there's some hardware solutions, some software solutions. Probably 95 to 99% of the innovations, when they use technology, are using software right now.
So that to me starts painting a vision of what winning could look like. If we can figure out in one parish and we can figure out how it grows from happy customers to sticky and then profitable, then maybe we can take it to others. Tell us just a little bit of your experience with the actual companies. Where have you gotten wins and losses? Where have people been able to do that and not been able to do that, just in this world?
In the Catholic world?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Catholic world's fascinating because everybody outside the Catholic Church thinks the Pope runs the place,
right?
And thinks it's highly centralized. But the church is the most decentralized you can possibly be as an organization. So with this concept of subsidiarity, which basically says any decision that can be made locally should be made locally, you've got only a 3-tier hierarchy really in the church. You got Pope, Bishop, and Pastor. The Pope has the power to place and remove bishops. And beyond that, they have very little control over what the bishops do. And then the bishops can place and remove pastors. But if you talk to any bishop, they think, even though the pastors have declared obedience to them, they're the least obedient group of people they've ever worked with.
right, Father
So, so as long as you're following the terms of service, i.e. canon law, then the pastor kind of runs their own business and the bishop runs their own business. And there's really only the power to place and remove. And so the Vatican has the Pope, who's super powerful in deciding who's a bishop. But there's no sort of VP layer that is in charge of each individual area of the church. They have these things called dicasteries, which are very small organizations with a lot of times there's some that have formal power, but a lot of them don't have any formal power other than just advisory. So the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has true power, and they adjudicate any sexual abuse claims or cover-up claims in the church. But it's not a traditional sort of corporate VP level with lots of budgets and power. And then you got the Pope, and then you got the bishops, and the bishops have a ton on their plate trying to manage their pastors. And they get together in what's called the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in the U.S. But the USCCB, again, doesn't have formal authority. The bishops get together and write documents to advise each other, but ultimately the bishops are responsible for executing on each of the recommendations from the USCCB. There's a few things around safety where they've opted to be accountable, but a lot of it is advisory. And then the diocese basically runs on a tax on each of the collections of each of the parishes. So they can place and remove a pastor, and they can try to give them all kinds of coaching and advice, and they might run a seminary or not to help train the priests in their diocese. But that's typically a pretty small organization centrally at a diocesan level. And then you have the parish, which is typically somebody that's had zero training in business or how to run a business. Yet each of them are running somewhere between a $500,000 and $2 million business, and they don't really have any background on how to run a business or how to hire anybody or fire them or motivate them or set up metrics or anything. So the net of all that is nobody in these three tiers are naturally business people.
Right.
And so they're not necessarily experienced in thinking about how to use third-party solutions to improve their businesses. So you've got an interesting challenge and opportunity in selling to the church, because you have to be really, really frugal, because your buyer is not a good buyer of software or services or solutions. Mm-hmm. So once you're able to get over that hump and get enough pastors or enough bishops to use you, then the word starts to spread. And some of these businesses are, 50, 75, 100 years old in the Catholic Church. And they tend to stay around forever, even though some of them aren't that innovative, because it's so incredibly hard for a new startup to break in. So it's probably the hardest in the business world. The hardest person to sell software to is the HR director, because they don't really control the profits of the organization. Mm-hmm. So they're the hardest to sell to. In the Catholic Church, there's no easy place to sell to. So if you're selling to pastors, or you're selling to school principals, or you're selling to diocese, it's just really hard because they're not experienced buyers of services and software. Now you also have this new innovation going on, which we can talk about if you want, where there's sort of the traditional bricks and mortar parish, and then you've got a lot of sort of direct to consumer activities going on, where you're selling services directly to Catholics, the hallows, the rituals, those kind of folks. So you've also now got this sort of, you can sell your solutions through the hierarchy of the church, and you can also go directly to the end Catholic. So it's definitely a hard space to have a win in, but once you get traction, you can plan on being around for a very, very long time, because it is just so hard to get to critical mass.
Yeah, and I think if you the finalists that we have online, I think that those two markets, like the top-down ecclesial sales versus the lay sales, bottom up, I think they're both represented by a lot of people here. And some of them probably even feel a bit blended. And so we might have a ministries that might end up feeling like they're having to navigate both of those environments at the same time.
Yeah, the blends are fascinating, because you can kind of get a little bit of your own traction and then go and sell direct. So sometimes those can work.
Yeah,
work best.
yeah. That's, you worked with one parish some, and what I recall is that one parish tried a blended approach, and maybe you could describe a little bit of what that story was like.
Yeah, so this was a project probably six or 7 years ago now, where there clear unmet need so I wasn't really involved in the sausage making of parishes until about nine and a half years ago, when we had a troubled priest at our parish. So he was a pastor one day, and not our pastor the next day. And fortunately, he got caught before he had hurt anybody, and so he's not a priest anymore, but he's getting all the help that he was crying out for along the way, that nobody picked up the signal that he was desperately in need of help. So we had a situation where we had a pastor one day, no pastor the next day, and the archdiocese didn't have any extra priests for us. So we started getting these interim priests to just come in and say mass for 90 days at a time. And so a handful of us got together, and we're like, who'd been members of the parish forever, and said, hey, if we don't do something, this parish is going to go away. And so a bunch of us, we're right in the middle of the Silicon Valley. We got a bunch of software people and startup people. And so we kind of put our startup hats on and said, hey, it can't be that hard to figure out how to run a parish. Let's go figure it out. And we started down this process. And we did figure it out, and the parish is thriving now. And now some of what we're doing hopefully will be codified in software here soon. So it's repeatable in lots of places. But one of the early folks I had talked to was this fellow Ryan Krieger, who I met through Notre Dame. And he was a devout Catholic guy who also knew how to code. And so we started talking, and he got excited about trying to build some software for Catholics. And he lined up a bishop who was all excited about it up in Minneapolis. And so I put a few bucks in, and we started building code. And then the bishop got ousted up in Minneapolis. So we lost our first customer. And we kept building, and then J.S. Pollock, who's one of the biggest bulletin printer companies, was starting to see that these printed bulletins are probably going to go away at some point, and they needed to start thinking about digital. And so we did a distribution deal with J.S. Pollock first, and then they came back and wanted to acquire the whole thing. And so we ended up selling it to Pollock. And so now Ryan is leading a bunch of their digital efforts at Pollock. So there it was interesting. Pollock's been around forever. They're selling a product that's a great product, but it really hasn't had much innovation in the traditional printed bulletin for decades. But yet they and a few others have most of the market share in bulletins. So because they already had lots of distribution, that's why we thought it'd be great to partner up with them, and that could allow us to get our technology to market much more cost effectively than we could trying to go diocese by diocese or parish by parish. So we did a little bottoms up. We did a little bit of direct to parish, direct to diocese, and then ultimately we found that that an incumbent distribution channel like the printed bulletin guys was the best way to get that technology to market.
Yeah, and I'll pull one of the questions from the chat right now, where now we've talked about kind of bottoms up, top down, and blended. Do you feel like if you're in general counseling some of these groups, you're directing people more one way than the other, to like try to go bottoms up, or is it, talk a little bit, does it give priority?
Yeah, it's what you're going to spend most of your iteration time on as a founder. Is what you want to try to do is get your product to market as soon as you possibly can. Everybody talks about the MVP and all that and product market fit. I like to talk about product market channel fit.
Yeah.
So get your product to market, and before you get the product market, go talk to 100 of your potential customers. So what you build initially is better than if you build something without talking to them. So it's better to talk to them and then build versus build then talk to them. But if you can get your product live as soon as you possibly can, then you're going to spend usually, most of my startups spend 6 to 9 months iterating very carefully, iterate, measure, on a very metrics driven, data driven, weekly cadence to try to figure out the answer to that question. And sometimes a company might have 3 potential units.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be able to sell direct to consumer. Mm-hmm. You might be able to sell through the parishes. You might be able to sell through the diocese. Sometimes you can analyze them, and you should try to analyze the unit economics of them before you try too hard. Because some cases it's easier to see which is your unit, but sometimes you just have to try a couple different ones because it's not obvious when you get started. Mm-hmm. But if you math out, if you pick a unit and say, okay, we're going to go direct to consumer, then what you want to do is do the math on that and say, okay, let's go spend a little bit of money on Facebook. Let's spend $100 a week or $500 a week and see how many customers we get for that $100 or that $500. And then let's compare that to what we think the customer is willing to pay us on a monthly basis. And so you can try that channel usually pretty easily on not too many dollars per week, and start to see if you're anywhere close to, hey, we spend X on Facebook ads. Do we get 2X back in gross margin pretty quickly? If you get anywhere close when you start, then you can spend your time iterating on that. If you're way off before you even spend that money on saying, hey, this math's never going to work, or you spend a little bit of money and the math's nowhere close to working, then you may want to have to think about pivoting over to a different channel to try. But there's, the direct to consumer stuff's pretty easily. You spend a certain amount per week. What's the CAC? What's the customer acquisition cost to drive a user? What do they pay you? Do you turn X into 2X pretty quickly? You do the same math when you're going direct to more of a B2B sale to a pastor or to a diocese. And it's the same math. It's just that the unit of investment is a sales rep. So the founder acts like rep number 1 and starts trying to go sell customers. And there's some rule of thumb math in that document I'm referring to that I'll get to John. He can get to you, that kind of lays out the basics of how to think about, if you're going B2B, how do you think about proving out your unit economics there?
Awesome. So one of the other items that I want to talk about are just avenues that people might access investors or coaches, especially those investors who can coach well. And you connecting with Ryan Krieger, like Ryan Krieger is one of our coaches. So he's advising Coin, who I believe you've met already, Eric Newhouse. But that seems to be an ideal that I would say is part of our vision of why Notre Dame sees a play here at all. Like, I think we can help convene good investors and coaches with the right entrepreneurs. And like we've heard of these different networks or places like Fatica or places like this, but where would you go right now to find, where's the well that everyone's drinking at, where we can start corralling the pre-existing groups that are already helping, or is it so fragmented it's not there yet?
Yeah, I hope we have it all super well organized. in the next few years. I think efforts like this are awesome. So, you know, I think Idea Center knows how to match a founder with a great coach. And then there's those of us behind the scenes willing to coach the coaches as well. So, you know, I think the fact that people are in this program, you should have a great coach. If you're not happy with your coach, talk to John, because we could, you know, help that coach learn more how to coach, or help you get additional coaches. So I think the fact that you're on this call, it's a good start. I coach tons of folks informally. Happy to do a lot of it as much as time allows. And then we also have, you know, the Notre Dame Venture Capital Club has got a bunch of young folks who are learning how to coach. And those of us who do venture all day, every day, are coaching those kids who are going on to coach folks. So I think we're building up a nice base of founder coaches at the Idea Center. So I think you're in the right place. And then it's, you know, it's just a lot of thinking through, you know, that happy customer who comes back often, where the unit economics work. And if you just stay laser focused on keeping it simple that way, you really have a lot of success quickly.
Awesome.
Once you have the unit economics working, so there's, on the investor side, it's weird. So in startup land, there are seed stage founder coaches like me. So in my day job, I'm usually the first money into a company, or I'll be, rarely has more than a few $100,000 gone into a company before I get involved. So, and then I just coach from the earliest of days. I even backed one founder who didn't know what unmet need he wanted to work on yet, because I just had so much faith in the founder. So I get involved super early. So these early stage investors like me bring coaching and bring money in traditional venture. I do a lot of Catholic coaching where somebody else brought the money that didn't necessarily know how to build startups. So they already have the money, but then they just need the coaching. So a lot of times the first 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 in a company will come from, you know, we call it the wealthy uncle.
Yeah.
Somebody who knows the founder really well and has had outsized success in their career, and just believes in you and just always wanted to be involved in anything you're involved in. A lot of those folks are wonderful people who are great business people, but oftentimes they don't necessarily have any experience or much experience in startups. So if you get money from the angel group like that, you just want to make sure, be extra careful to make sure you're getting your coaching elsewhere from an experienced founder coach.
Got it.
And it's great when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm angel funded and I don't know what to do. Can you help me?" That's awesome. I love doing that. It's rare that you'll email somebody who you've never met and they'll write a check for you. That's rare. So you tend to want to try to go to your inner circle of folks that know you. If there's a common university with you, that's often good. There's some connection typically that causes folks to do those first early funding.
So,
once you have early funding, then it's all about getting your unit economics to work.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt for 1 minute, because I actually want to give one of these guys a chance to talk to you. And I know that he has to go celebrate Mass in 10 minutes. Do you mind if we spend just the last portion of you actually engaging with one of these pastoral software programs and hear a little bit, and we just hear some live feedback?
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
Awesome. Josh, can you go?
I wonder who that's going to be that has to go say Mass. So my name is Father Josh McCarty. It's nice to meet you, Tim. I'm a priest and a nerd. And a number of years ago, I was getting overwhelmed by the details of parish life, of the quantity of people who needed pastoral care, the number of details involved with sacramental preparation, especially marriage preparation and funeral preparation. And so I looked for a solution to help me manage that and sleep better at night, and it wasn't out there. And so I had to build it myself. And so I built a piece of software called Pastoral Parish, which helps priests to work together with both their pastoral teams, along with the people preparing for the sacraments, to make sure everything is kept on track so that people can sleep well at night. So it's great collaboration and communication between the priest, the staff, and the people preparing for the sacraments. So in a nutshell, that's Pastoral Parish. It's web-based, and we're in about 8 parishes right now.
Awesome. So you said you're helping it has the laity as well who are preparing for the sacraments?
Yeah, so what we do is we call it a pathway. It's an API token to Bob and Gina, who are preparing for marriage. And they, along with the priest, can see the progression, the progress bar advance over time as they fill in bits of their information. They know that they still need the MA form. And so now that's checked off, and everybody's on the same page as they advance to being fully ready. No surprises. There's some really bad stories. Everybody knows a bad story of a failed sacramental preparation.
Awesome. So are your 8, when did you sell your first parish?
The first parish was about 2.5 years ago.
And okay. And are your 8 parishes happy?
Yes, they are happy. And I'm one of those 8 parishes too.
And how do you measure that?
We don't measure it real discreetly at this point, except that we've got feedback from the parishes. We have a daily report of which parishes have logged in for the day. Did they create a marriage preparation? And we're ramping up with our coach our conversations with our parishes.
Okay. So Net Promoter Score would be a great way to trick around whether they're happy. So I'd think about that, and I just sent John the short summary. Sounds like you've had good retention. So
Yes.
Have you ever had a parish turn you off?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
You have.
Largely because in use, inactivity.
How many total parishes have tried you to have 8 active now?
11.
11 have tried and 8 are active?
About 2 have lapsed due to inactivity.
Okay. And were those early lapsers, or have they lapsed recently? So i.e., have you gotten better as the 2.5 years have gone on?
Yes. Yeah, we've gotten better. Yeah, we have gotten better. There was one lapsed a year and a half ago, another one 2 years ago.
Okay. And your 8 parishes that are active now, do you have good metrics on what predicts a retained parish and what predicts a churning parish?
No, we do not.
So you can get metrics on that. You can look back at the metrics of who churned off, and you can start to look at what do you need to see in your metrics on usage on a daily basis or weekly basis to predict whether a customer is going to churn or not. So usually they'll churn much after they're inactive.
Yeah,
so I think hard about setting up some metrics so you can monitor that.
We're in the process.
Okay. So if we think of the big 3, do you have happy customers? Or are they sticking around? Are they retaining? Sounds like you anecdotally have pretty good numbers on happiness and retention. I just put some meat around that. And then the question is unit economics. So what is each parish paying you?
They're paying $99 a month.
$99 a month. Okay. And you're probably running 85% gross margin. Not too much labor involved on a monthly basis helping each parish. They're mostly using your software. And
well, our labor right now is in our sales department.
That's sales, but so there's 2 parts of labor. There's labor that is cost of goods sold. That's helping parishes as you scale, more like customer support or management. And then there's labor that sells. So it sounds like the 8 parishes mostly use the software without needing any dedicated humans from you.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
Great. Okay, so then, so $99 a month, and they're sticking around. Sounds like the ones that stick around for at least 2+ years.
Correct.
And if they're active after year 1 or year 2, unless the pastor changes, probably stick around for a long time.
Yes. And we're actually happy to stick around after pastors because we can help them transition really well by giving data to the next guy.
Okay. And then did you pick $99 a month out of thin air, or did you?
We picked it out of conversations with people.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of other products to compare it to.
Huh?
We've actually changed a lot where we came in. We've come in higher, we've tried lower, and we set it a little bit more than the price of cable television for the month.
Okay. So do you have any math on the ROI for those 8 parishes? The return on investment.
Comparing,
So in general, startups get to charge about 10% of the value they create. So if you can show definitively that parishes that use your software do a better job on the sacraments, and that results in more active families in the parish, which results in more collections. If you can define that definitively, then if you take about 10% of that number is typically what you get to charge. So if you kind of came to 99 a month through conversations and trial and error, so 99 a month is $1,200 a year. So if you multiply that by 10, that says you're probably having an impact on those parishes of about $12,000 a year. So if you help the parish grow by $12,000 a year, you can typically charge $1,200 a year. As a general rule of thumb, startups get to charge about 10% of the value they create. So you want to try to measure.
It's a real challenge to get a measurement, although there is a negative measurement. In other words, that when the marriage prep failed and then the couple left,
yeah,
that's pretty discreet.
So I would look at how many families for each of the 8 parishes, go parish by parish, get 1 or 2 of the parishes that you have the closest relationship with, or your parish is a great way to do it. But look at the folks who've gone through your software in preparing for the sacraments, and then what percentage of those are active in the parish. So are they volunteering families, ministry active families? And are they monthly giving families, any donations or other? And if you can say, hey, look, 88% of families that go through sacraments using our software end up having such a great experience that they end up staying active in the parish, that's a big deal.
All right. Well, I'm very sorry, but speaking of big deals, I got to go celebrate the mass.
Okay, so just one 30 seconds more.
Yeah.
So the last part is, who do you have your team who's selling parishes, and what does that person cost you versus how much revenue they're driving on a monthly basis?
Right. Yeah.
That's the big one, because if you've only closed 8 parishes in 2.5 years, at $99 a month. So let's say your sales rep costs you $50,000 a year. You need him to be closing about $150K a year in new revenue. So you're getting $1,200 per parish per year. Mm-hmm. You need to sell like 140 parishes a year. Mm-hmm. So they have to sell like 12 parishes a month at that price point to make the math work. So that's a big one to get your metrics around. And so who's your unit? It sounds like you got sales reps calling on pastors.
Yeah.
So what does that person cost you? Multiply by 3 as a general rule of thumb. They got to close 3 times as much business as they cost you. And then translate that into what you charge per parish as to how many parishes they have to close a month. And so I suspect here, your pricing is either too low because you're not measuring the ROI, or you got to get a lot more sophisticated in your in how to get your sales rep to close more parishes each month.
And Tim, I can follow up with the winning metrics things for Josh. So Josh, I'll let you float because you got to go to celebrate. But thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. And Tim,
there's even more questions than we could get to. And so if you were open to it, I would love to think of how you might be able to still respond to questions or maybe connect to teams. But I'll connect with you.
Yeah, just send around my email.
Okay.
I'll try to be as responsive as I can within my day job constraints. But awesome. I'll try to do what I can. But you got the basics now for everybody. If you think of how I walked him through, when you read the winning metrics chart, you can sort of do that same translation for your startup.
Yes.
And if you send me your analysis of those three, how you're thinking about those three, I'm happy to iterate with you on those. Those are pretty easy versus just general. So if you kind of take that winning metrics chart and say, just like I did with him, what do you have do you have happy customers? Do you have retention? Do your unit economic, what's your unit? And are the unit economics working? If you think through that math, those are pretty easy to iterate back and forth on an email.
Yep.
If you're not live yet, great, because then you can think about what those need to be to work, and then you can whiteboard them before you ever build.
Fantastic. And I would say to you guys, the document that you're going to receive, this is great material to go over and review with your coaches too. So this is really valuable material there. So Tim, this was great. Thank you also for your gracious offer to continue engaging. For everyone online, we're now going to move into small groups, and I'll let John take to the mic to explain more about it, but we're going to reconvene in an hour, and we're going to hear from another speaker, John Cavadini, as well. And Tim, you're welcome to come back if you're interested. We'll also be recording it, so I can just send you the
if you could send it to me, that'd be great.
I'll do that.
Thanks everybody for doing what you're doing. I hope you're massively successful because the church needs it.
Thanks, Tim.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, John,
so
you got next.
Yeah, so let's just take a few minute break. So let's take come back at 7:06 Eastern, so maybe 4-minute break, and then we'll reconvene, and then we'll go into small groups, and you'll be just automatically pushed into that. So just come back in maybe 4 minutes, take a stretch break, whatever you do.
Yeah, and I'll also share, Edward and Anna, you guys were asking really good questions. And so sometimes we're going to have a speaker. If everyone else wants to jump off, I'm just going to respond to that question in particular that they were asking. You guys were asking a really relevant one, which is, and it's going to be a challenge that I think we're going to see regularly through this, which is, how do we translate this thing to my world? And sometimes it's going to be vice versa. We're going to listen to some ministry people as well. And how are we going to translate that? These, I think, are really good batched questions. Tim has already been responsive to Eric from Coin. And so he is responsive to these types of sessions. But I would also say, when you guys get this knowledge, bring it back to the group. So when you start finding out that you have a question that's a general need, like Edward, if you went and talked to Tim, I see Karina doing thumbs up right now. Like, Karina needs this information too. So when you guys go out and hunt this type of feedback, bring it back, because it doesn't mean that everyone necessarily needs to join that call, but it seems like a lot of people want this type of input. So Edward and Anna, I'm happy to do intros, but I'm also just going to share his email out, so you guys can reach out direct as well. So whatever makes it easiest. And guys, I'm also going to try to be good about stewarding your questions as you're going through. I'm sorry I couldn't get to that one as we were going, but I'm generally going to prioritize that we get to a depth point rather than I scatter it out, because I do think we will be able to still find those questions later and bring them. So I hope that worked for you all. Tim is awesome, and you just know how to flow with him a little bit. So you guys, again, ready for a break? I'm here to help. You got office hours for me. You got me on Slack. So let me know how I can help you guys get more out of all of this.
Welcome back, everyone. So we'll have Dr. John Cavadini and Dr. John Sikorsky will be introducing him. I want to make a quick announcement, though. We'll have some time for Q&A towards the end of his talk. And so if you want to enter that like we have in the chat function, then we can draw questions from there. So welcome, Dr. John Cavadini. Thank you for being here. And Dr. John Sikorsky, if you want to more formally introduce him, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, John Cannon. I think one of the jokes is if you're part of this challenge, somehow you have to have the name John associated with you. So there's a lot of us here, but it's my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. John Cavadini to this group, both on a personal note and I think on a professional note for all your sakes. I'm very excited. Dr. Cavadini's been a mentor to hundreds, if not thousands of students at Notre Dame. I'm a former student of his as well, and he's been just an incredible source of wisdom and theological truth and ability to understand God more deeply in my own spiritual life, in my professional life, and sort of a mentor of sorts along the way as well. So I think you're all in for a treat. Dr. Cavadini is a professor of theology at the University of Notre Dame, having served as the chair for 13 years from 1997 until 2010. Since 2000, he's also served as the director of the McGrath Institute for Church Life at Notre Dame. He received a PhD in 1988 from Yale University. A member of the faculty at Notre Dame since 1990, Dr. Cavadini specializes in patristic and early medieval theology, the theology of St. Augustine, and the history of biblical and patristic exegesis. He's the author of several theological books. He also writes essays, articles, and reviews in popular journals, and is frequently called upon by church leaders, ministers, I guess we could add to the list, innovators, to talk on these subjects as well. Some recent publications include Pope Francis and the Event of Encounter, and Mary on the Eve of the Second Vatican Council. In 2009, he was appointed by Pope Benedict XVI to a 5-year term on the International Theological Commission. This commission, whose membership is personally reviewed and appointed by the Pope, consists of some 30 theologians from around the world who advise the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Dr. Cavadini has served as a consultant as well to the USCCB Committee on Doctrine since 2006, and was also named by Pope Benedict to the Order of the Knights of St. Gregory the Great. And as director of the McGrath Institute for Church Life, he inaugurated the ECHO program in catechetical leadership, the Notre Dame Vision program for high school students, and is responsible for continued growth and outreach of the McGrath Institute, which often partners with Catholic dioceses, parishes, and schools across the country, and I think even the world, to address pastoral challenges with both theological depth and rigor. So it's my great honor and privilege to turn it over now to Dr. Cavadini. And just a quick reminder, we will have some Q&A at the end, so please go ahead and just continue submitting those questions via the chat function, and I'll kind of moderate those at the proper time.
Hi, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen. Am I sharing it?
We see your Word document right now.
You can see it?
We can see it.
Can you see a Word document?
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
It means I can't see all of you anymore, unfortunately. I can see some of you. So friends, thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for the kind introduction, John. I hope I can live up to that one. I hit upon this idea of co-responsibility reading Benedict XVI. It's really his idea. And it has to do with leadership in the church, I think. I think it has to do with, I guess you could say, expanding our understanding of what leadership in the church means, what it means to be a leader in the church. And I thought that because it has that capacity to understand, to expand, I guess you could say, our understanding what it means to be a leader in the church, and to feature in some ways the leadership of lay people in the church, I thought that it would be, I don't know, maybe this is a wrong calculation, but this is what Benedict does, and what Francis does also. I wanted to start by first sort of contemplating, you might say, the mystery of the church. Very briefly, kind of a review, because I think that when we talk about lay leadership in the church, sometimes we almost implicitly or unconsciously imagine the church as a secular environment, or as a secular organization, and the leadership that lay people provide is something like what we might provide in a secular organization. And I think our imagination needs adjustment. Mine does anyway, because my thinking tends along those lines if I'm not careful. So I thought I would offer this this brief introduction that comes from Benedict and then a little catechetical review. Is that too insulting to everybody? I hope not, because I think these catechetical reviews, they serve for me to be a kind of contemplation of one or another awesome mystery of our faith. And then to go back, circle back to Pope Benedict's speech, his major speech in which he talked about this, and show how he, in a sense, incorporates this theology into his call for co-responsibility, and then open it up for discussion. Okay? So I have 4 little headings here. You can't really say it's not okay, I guess. And can you hear me, since I'm petrified that my internet connection is not the greatest? If we have a thunderstorm or something.
We hear you fine.
Okay, so if you can see if you can see my screen, I collected all I did was collect some passages here. And the first one is one of the places where Pope Benedict invokes this notion of co-responsibility. This is in a speech to Catholic Action, and he calls for a change in how we think about the role of lay people in the church, using this new word, co-responsibility. He said that lay people should not be regarded as collaborators of the clergy, but rather as people who are really co-responsible for the church's being and acting. And went on to say, therefore, it's important that a mature and committed laity be consolidated, which can make its own specific contribution to the ecclesiastical mission. Okay, so I'm assuming that's all of you. You're the mature and committed laity, already consolidated in some ways, and really leaders already, and incipient leaders. And I think that the difference between collaboration with the clergy and taking co-responsibility is a crucial distinction. I think it means that lay people don't only participate in what is essentially a clerical structure of leadership, but rather the clerical structure of leadership is partly there to nurture and to grow up lay leadership. So there's a kind of co-responsibility for the being and acting of the church in that way. Okay, but before we comment on that even further, I just wanted to run through this little contemplation, if it's okay with you. Maybe at the end of a day, a little contemplation is in order. And so this is a brief catechetical review, which I think is an appeal to the imagination. Because if you're going to do any ecclesiology in the church, in the Catholic Church anyway, it basically is founded on images. So Catholic ecclesiology is really an appeal to the imagination. The images are proposed in Scripture, and the church has meditated on them, over the centuries. And that meditation continues. And in a way, Benedict's call for co-responsibility comes from a continuation of, or the continuation of, this contemplation of the mystery of the church. Okay, so what makes the church? Question. And here's the answer from the Catechism. The church is born primarily, I tell my students, by the way, sorry for interrupting myself, that this is the most important article in the whole Catechism. Out of all I tell them that we're going to have the Catechism Oscars, and we're going to nominate the Catechism Award winner, Academy Catechism Award winners, and you can nominate which should be the top 10 articles of the Catechism. But I engineered the election, so this one always comes out first on top. Because I think it's the thing that's, in our church, it's almost the thing that's most lost, is what the church is and what makes the church. So I'll put in that plug for number 766 here. The church is born primarily of Christ's total self-giving for our salvation, anticipated in the institution of the Eucharist and fulfilled on the cross. The origin and growth of the church are symbolized by the blood and water which flowed from the open side of the crucified Jesus. See the image? How the ecclesiology develops from the biblical image? For it was from the side of Christ, as he slept the sleep of death upon the cross, that there came forth the wondrous sacrament of the Holy Church. That's from Sacrosanctum Concilium. Another brief meditation on that image. As Eve was formed from the sleeping Adam's side, so the church was born from the pierced heart of Christ hanging dead on the cross. And there's Ambrose reflecting again on this image and drawing in an image from Genesis. So there's two biblical images from which the theology of the church arises. And drawn into that, of course, is Ephesians, not stated here, but the church is the bride of Christ. So the church, in other words, is not a club. It's not something that we constitute by our will to get together and do stuff, like a secular organization, or even in some ways like the evangelical view of the church, which competes very much with the Catholic view of the church out there in television land. So it's important for Catholics to understand that our view of the church is not that. It's not something essentially that we form by our will to gather together, but rather it's the love of Christ which forms the church, poured out on the cross. So it's a visible society in the world, but bound together by something it doesn't give itself, namely the blood of Christ or the love of Christ. That's what makes the church, that love. Nothing we bring to it. And so the church is a mystery proposed by the Bible to the imagination. And so my second question, what makes the church? I hope you can forgive my sense of humor, friends. As you can see, it's not even funny, because I have to point out to you that it's a little bit of a joke. Okay, to ask the same question again. So what makes the church? The Eucharist makes the church. This is Catechism 1396. The Eucharist makes the church. Those who receive the Eucharist are united more closely to Christ. Through it, Christ unites them to all the faithful in one body, the church. Communion renews, strengthens, and deepens this incorporation into the church, already achieved by baptism. In baptism, we have been called to form but one body. The Eucharist fulfills this call, the cup of blessing that we bless. Is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? That beautiful passage from 1 Corinthians. See the way in which a Catholic ecclesiology is founded in these images? And I'd encourage you, to nourish your own imagination as leaders of the church, in these images, all the time. So why does the Eucharist make the church? Because the Eucharist is, right, the representation, the sacramental representation of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. He's right there. That's the hour of the Passion, which the Eucharist represents for us and welcomes us into Christ's moment of self-giving. So that 766, if the church is born primarily of Christ's self-giving love, anticipated in the institution of the Eucharist and fulfilled on the cross, then the Eucharist makes the church, because the Eucharist is that self-giving love, the sacrifice of Christ, that unique sacrifice, not repeated, but made present. So the Eucharist makes the church, not us. We don't make the church. Okay, so my next question, what makes the church? Sorry, friends. What makes the church? Baptism makes us members of the body of Christ. Baptism incorporates us into the church. The baptized have become living stones to be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood. Here's another scriptural image, friends. All of Catholic ecclesiology comes from these images, which the Holy Spirit has proposed to the church's imagination in Scripture. By baptism, they share in the priesthood of Christ, in his prophetic and royal mission. They are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, that you may declare the wonderful deeds of him who called them out of darkness into his marvelous light. That beautiful passage from 1 Peter. So friends, how is this related to the other two passages? Well, baptism, we know, incorporates us what? Into the Paschal mystery, into the death, the passion, the death, and the resurrection of Christ. So it incorporates us into the mystery of that love which forms the church. The point being, friends, that what you don't see in any of these answers is us. We don't make the church. The church is not something, it's not our work. The church is wholly the work of grace. It's wholly the work of the grace that flows from the blood of Christ, from the sacrifice of Christ, binding us together into a fellowship that we didn't give ourselves and couldn't give ourselves. Because the only thing really that can unite human beings without any division is a completely selfless love, a completely self-giving love that has no vested interest. That's the only thing that can truly create human communion. And that is only, and the only place, the only person whose love that is Jesus Christ. So the Eucharist makes the church, baptism makes the church, incorporates us into the church, because it is the one sacrifice of Christ which binds us together, and the sacraments mediate that church-making love to us. So that's, we don't make the church, the sacraments do. Finally, friends, my next question, I know this is getting old. What makes the church? Okay, in the ecclesial service of the ordained minister, it is Christ himself who is present to his church as head of his body, shepherd of his flock, high priest of the redemptive sacrifice, teacher of truth. This is what the church means by saying that the priest, by virtue of the sacrament of holy orders, acts in the person of Christ, the head of the church. So friends, what makes the church? Christ makes the church. We don't make the church. And the priest doesn't make the church either, insofar as he's acting in his own person. If I were, well, yeah. So it's the sacrament of holy orders, which grants the priest a participation in the priesthood of Christ, such that the priest, when acting as an ordained priest and not as his own person, makes present the priesthood of Christ. And therefore, in celebrating the Eucharist, it's Christ who acts, it's Christ who gathers his body, it's Christ who constitutes himself as head of the body in the sacrifice of the altar. In other words, friends, the church's sacramental system is not her own work primarily. It's the work of Christ. And the sacraments, in this case, baptism and the Eucharist through holy orders, make the church a gift of grace. No works righteousness here. We don't earn our way into the church. The church isn't built on our own righteousness or our own virtue. We're lucky that it isn't, and that instead we find in the church mediated the blood of Christ poured out on the cross for everybody, including people that we don't like or might not like, and people who can't even participate fully, handicapped people, mentally handicapped people. Christ died for everybody. Okay, so how many priests are there in the church? It's my only different question. Well, there's only one. Yeah, Jesus Christ. But there are two ways of participating in the one priesthood of Christ. The ministerial or hierarchical priesthood of bishops and priests, and the common priesthood of all the faithful. Each in their own way, each in its own proper way in the one priesthood of Christ. While being ordered to one another, they differ essentially. In what sense? While the common priesthood of the faithful is exercised by the unfolding of baptismal grace, the ministerial priesthood is at the service of the common priesthood. It's directed at the unfolding of the baptismal grace of all Christians. So you can see right here, friends, that neither of these priesthoods come from us. They come from Christ. Both of them are a participation in his priesthood, meaning in his sacrifice, in his self-gift. And they, and since the community of the church is ordered by and to that self-gift, therefore, both of these are ordered towards communion. That's my essential point. And they both belong to the mystery of community in the church. And therefore, when we're thinking about co-responsibility, what we're thinking about is the interaction of these two priesthoods. At least I'd like to suggest that. We're not thinking of anything essentially secular. We're not talking about power sharing in the as though this were a secular organization. We're not talking about a zero-sum understanding of power in which the lay people have a share and the hierarchy has a share. That's not what leadership in the church is. Okay, so here's Benedict's speech. I'll run through it very quickly. You can see how he deploys all of these ideas in coming to this idea of the co-responsibility. This is a speech that he made to the Archdiocese of Rome, in which he aired this idea for the first time, as far as I know. So he invokes the church as a mystery of communion. It's not merely a spiritual reality, but lives in history. We've already seen that, right? The church is a visible society held together by something it didn't give itself, and therefore can be a sacrament of the unity of the human race. Benedict says, on the one hand, there's still a tendency to identify the church unilaterally with the hierarchy, so clericalism, forgetting the common responsibility, the common mission of the people of God, which in Christ we all share. Remember that baptism gives us all a share in the mission of the church because of our common priesthood. We saw that passage above. On the other hand, the tendency still persists to identify the people of God unilaterally in accordance with a merely sociological or political concept, forgetting the newness and specificity of that people. So in other words, sometimes in reaction to clericalism, the emphasis so swings to lay participation and lay leadership that we tend to, in leaving behind clericalism, assimilate the church to a secular, well, wash out the mystery of the church and assimilate the church to simply a secular organization. I think we're actually very prone to that. So I'm showing you how Benedict himself tries to situate co-responsibility between these two mistakes, identifying the church primarily with the hierarchy and therefore lay people as simply collaborators with the hierarchy, with the church par excellence. And on the other hand, a reaction against clericalism, which essentially laicizes the church in the sense that it secularizes it. So what to do about it? In the first place, he says we have to improve everybody's formation so that it's more attentive and focused on the vision of the church, which is I hope that's the way I started out here. And I think that's the way we all need to start out. And this goes for everyone, on the part of priests as well as of religious and lay people, to understand ever better what this church is, this people of God in the body of Christ. So note the necessity of a deeper contemplation and reception of the mystery of the church, without which this formation is not possible. Because what we're going to end up doing is, in reaction against clericalism, we're going to end up forming what I think are not necessarily obviously secular structures, but they're going to be evangelical structures in the sense that, not in the Catholic sense, but in the Protestant sense, because the evangelical churches have a very secularized understanding of the church, a very low church ecclesiology, where the church really is our work. But given that necessity, it also implies another, namely to improve pastoral structures in such a way that the co-responsibility of all the members of the people of God in their entirety is gradually promoted, with respect for their vocations and the respective roles of the consecrated and lay people. So part of the hierarchy's job is to improve these pastoral structures. Co-responsibility applies to them too, not just to the laity. This needed improvement of pastoral structures, number 5 here, demands a change in mindset, particularly concerning lay people. They must no longer be viewed as collaborators of the clergy, but truly recognized as co-responsible for the church's being in action, thereby fostering the consolidation of a mature and committed laity. So I've come back to the original quote, though this is taken from a different speech. But I hope you hear it differently after sort of working through this little contemplation of the mystery of the church. There's still a long way to go, Benedict says. Compared to the number of inhabitants in each parish, the lay people who are ready to work in various apostolic fields are still few and far between. That's Benedict. In other words, where are the lay leaders in the mission of the church? The lay-led projects, the lay-led initiatives, the work of the Sancta Plebs, the holy people, as served by the hierarchy, and what is needed to foster it. And the idea of the conference we had called in co-responsibility was sort of to say, well, if you look closely enough, it's here. Like, for example, if you look at all of you, here it is. There are many, I think, lay-led projects, lay-led initiatives. And I think some of our work is to lift them up so that people can see them and so that people understand that this is true leadership in the church, so that so that you kind of shift the center of gravity in the church. I'm not suggesting that we shift away from the kind of leadership that is intrinsic to the episcopacy, to the hierarchy, but achieving a better sense of the communio, of the communion, which the two priesthoods are intended to build up. So here's my brief concluding thought. The priesthood of the baptized, I think it's important to remember that it is a priesthood. And this is where we're most prone to having a secularized understanding of lay leadership, I think, creep in, to forget that the priesthood of the baptized truly is a priesthood. That means it flows from the one sacrifice of Christ, right? It's a participation in the one sacrifice of Christ and from the mission which comes from that sacrifice. And therefore, its exercise is intrinsically ordered towards that sacrifice. It's intrinsically, in other words, ordered towards that which makes the church, towards Eucharistic communion. So an exercise of the baptismal priesthood that isn't ordered towards ecclesial communion, but rather disrupts it, is not an exercise of the baptismal priesthood. That means it can't be exercised apart from the ministry of the ordained, nor is it truly exercised if it tends toward the rupture of communion instead of towards building communion, because it's the priesthood of the baptized. And by the way, in my little catechesis, you can't do everything in half an hour. All the sacraments are ordered towards the Eucharist, including baptism. You know, there's a Protestant idea that the sacraments are basically ordered to baptism. The Catholic idea is that baptism itself is ordered as the first sacrament of initiation to the Eucharist, which completes initiation. So this would include evangelizing activity that rejected the authoritative teaching of the magisterium or undertaken in defiance of legitimate hierarchical authority. But at the same time, it does not mean permission is necessary. There's no need of a supplementary mandate from the hierarchy to exercise the duty to proclaim Christ, which comes by the virtue of the grace of baptism. That's the point of calling it a baptismal priesthood, right? That's the mandate right there. You don't need special permission from the hierarchy. The two priesthoods are mutually interrelated, and thus we have co-responsibility for being and acting of the church. Okay, I don't know if that helps situate this idea a little bit better, and maybe you have questions about it. I hope that was about 30 minutes or 25 maybe.
Sure, great. Thanks so much, Dr. Cavadini. So I'm just going to moderate the questions by asking several that have popped up in the chat box so far, and then obviously we can open up for discussion as well. So one question is more on the kind of theoretical level, and maybe I'll suggest that you answer it at the end if there's time. The question simply has to do whether this vision of co-responsibility for leadership in the church flows from the theology of the Trinity, and if so, how? So that's kind of sort of the systematic theology question, right? What's the relationship between the Trinity?
I'll give you a quick answer. Yes.
Okay. And then we'll ask the practical ones. Go ahead. All right. The answer is yes. Okay.
And I can come back to that. I don't mean to be flip about it, but you
No,
suggested we
yeah,
come
no,
back
I think
later.
that's good. I think for the crowd here, maybe, I think that's a great question. And like you said, you can come back to it. But I think there's a lot of people maybe that are wondering some of the practical things. And I'm going to take kind of executive privilege and tie this back to a question that came up a little bit earlier today. So earlier today, Tim Connors, Notre Dame graduate, Silicon Valley, Catholic venture capitalist entrepreneur, asked a question about kind of talked about the importance of precision and growth and professionalism among lay leadership in the church. And someone asked the question, how do you relate that to kind of the current state of affairs in the institutional church, right? So there's kind of the calling on one hand that we have to, to do the best we can, to be precise, to be professional, to grow. That suddenly sounds like that's my will. I'm taking the church, so to speak, right, into my own hands. Versus how do you reconcile that with, the church is Christ, right? The church is all these different images you gave. So I think there's a practical question of, as Catholic entrepreneurs, we have these visions, we have these ideas, we have a mission we're feeling, right? We want to be precise. We want to learn the best business text, we want to grow. And yet, we still have to be responsive to, as you said, not washing out the mystery of the church. So maybe just what's the relationship between the professionalism and the business and what's really needed versus really being abandoned maybe. So there's one question. And then the other one is, can you give some examples? Not only are you a theologian, but you've, in a sense, embodied perhaps the kind of co-responsibility of which you speak by building up an institute on campus and establishing all these programs and different relationships. So I'm going to just say maybe you're an example, but what are some examples of this notion of co-responsibility that you see as Benedict articulates it?
Okay. So on the first one, I have a few things to say that come to mind. All right. The first thing is co-responsibility is a little bit of a new idea. Okay. And it comes from, you can see the theology that it comes from. I want to say that new ideas aren't, you have to work with them, right? So in some ways, I can't say do this and don't do this. Because don't do this and do that. Because part of it is, working with the new idea and not saying, well, there's an ideal of perfection, and if I don't meet that, I shouldn't do anything. I think that's a little bit paralyzing. So whatever that ideal is, ideal of professionalization, ideal of theological precision, I don't know, all of these ideals we want to have, but I don't think we should let any of them, we have to find a balance. People have to find their own balance. So I think that's what leaders do partly. Secondly, I think that we can't work out the problem of professionalization for the church as a whole. I don't think. I think we can provide instances of it, but I don't think it's one size fits all. I think that being professional, there's a very wide range of what that might be. And one person's professionalism may not look like another person's. I don't think I'm a terribly organized person. I try really, really hard. I'm not very efficient and I'm not very, very organized. I just, after all these years, somehow it's not possible for me. I hope that in some other ways I am professional. And I think that like the secular ideal of professionalism is not the top ideal here, it seems to me. The top ideal is witness and communion. Those two things, seems to me, are important. And also, what we're doing, I think, is always appealing to the imagination. We're always, that's where the wellspring of, that's where a dynamism comes from. And to remember that we don't have to reinvent the wheel there. There's so many images that the Spirit has proposed, right, in Scripture and in art and in the tradition. So I tried to give some examples there from the Catechism. There's about 6 or 7 different images there. And in some sense, we live in that world. We live in the world of Spirit-proposed image. And our job, in a sense, is to repropose them persuasively as a way, third point, of building communion. We're not building an organization. I think that's the temptation, to think that we're entrepreneurs, we're building an organization. If that's what we think we're essentially doing, then we've lapsed into a secular mindset. But if we're building communion, if the point of our project is to build the one body, to to form the living stones, to allow the Holy Spirit to form the living stones, we don't do it. What we do is prepare the way. We certainly, I think my work has to do with, a lot of the apologetics I do, I think has to do with kind of like, if you can imagine an icon of the Lord, of the face of the Lord, that's gotten like a lot of dirt on it, misconceptions, caricatures, trivializations, people, all these blocks. But my job is to kind of clear them away, but I can't go into thinking that my job is to convert people. That's the Holy Spirit's job. Like, my job is to promote an encounter by clearing away some of the things that block the vision. But I have to remember that the faith finally is not reducible to reason or to argument. The faith comes from revelation, and that's an invitation from God. So I don't know. I think have to remember that co-responsibility means being involved in and invested in a mystery, the mystery of the church, and that's the ideal. And I think, okay, so will we make mistakes? Yes, we will. We will sometimes build an organization and forget, that the organization isn't a goal in itself. Or we will so concentrate on professionalism that we'll forget that conversions don't come from professionalism, and that professionalism can sometimes get in the way and stifle it. So I think to keep these categories of witness, of communion, of mystery, and of encounter in our minds, like our imaginations, keep returning to the source. That's why I did this tonight, because I need to always come back to this, to remember that the church is not my work. I participate in the mission of the church through the mandate given to me by the Lord in my baptism, but it's his church. He built it, and I only have the mandate because of him. I don't know. Those are some just thoughts, I guess. They're not solutions. And as to examples, well, I kind of hate to point
Can I
to
interrupt real
contemporary
quick?
ones. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just
What?
wondering. So I want to tie another question that's come up into the question of the examples, because I think perhaps I was a little dismissive of Edward's question here about, the theoretical question. I think the question really has to do, if this notion of co-responsibility is really founded in communion, right? You've mentioned communion many times here, that what we're after is communion, not clericalism, not a power struggle, not washing out the mystery, not our work. If the Trinity is really the foundation of this kind of communion and co-responsibility, then, right, the practical examples, how would this look in terms of the dynamic, say, between the hierarchy and the laity, right? I mean, maybe we can all imagine how it might not look or how it should not look, right?
So maybe can you give some examples of either the dynamic there? Because especially I think a lot of the people, the finalists here, they're really interested and have a stake, right, in fostering that communal, that relationship of communion, right? Whether it's I want my bishop to endorse my business, or I want my pastor to buy into what I am doing here, right? And so I think there is kind of a practical question here that arises, right? Because we know that in many places, maybe there is the secular notion of organization in a diocese. Maybe in many places we have the clericalism still. So can you relate maybe a little bit more deeply, yeah, the theology of the Trinity, communion, and then some practical examples of how this might look sort of at the, say, diocesan lay hierarchy relationship, and then simply maybe perhaps in any apostolates as well.
Okay, well, I mean, with regard to the Trinity, basically, the communion of the church is a participation in the life of the Trinity, because the Paschal mystery is the revelation of the love of the Son for the Father and of the Father for the Son. And the love that we see poured out on the cross is Trinitarian love, is the love that the Son has for the Father, and revealing the love that the Father has for the Son. So our way of participating in the Trinitarian life comes through baptism. Baptism incorporates us into the life of the Holy Trinity by configuring us to the Paschal mystery. So the church is our way of participating in the communion of the church, is our way of participating in the life of the Trinity. And then so the theology of co-responsibility points to the way in which the priesthood of the hierarchy is ordered towards the service of the common priesthood. In a sense, the common priesthood is the church. It's the church in the world. It's the front lines of the church. And the role of the ministerial priesthood is to build that up, to build up the front lines, you might say. And I think that can take different forms, frankly. I want to distinguish what I'm saying from what's called lay ecclesial ministry. I'm not against lay ecclesial ministry, the reality. I'm not against people working, lay people working officially in the church. But remember what that means is, it's lay people who are participating in a ministry that's not theirs, namely the ministry of the hierarchy. So in some sense, the theology of the lay ecclesial ministry in some ways has blocked our understanding of co-responsibility, because we start thinking that that's the only way for lay people to lead in the church. And I'm not trying to undercut the people who lead in that way. They do. But they are participating in a ministry that isn't theirs, right? That's properly the hierarchies. So structurally and theologically, lay ecclesial ministry is always going to be subordinate to the hierarchy, because it is their ministry. So that's a somewhat separate question from co-responsibility, I think. Not entirely. And I'm not trying to undercut anybody. In fact, I think we should pay these people more and help them more. So I form lay ecclesial ministries. I just don't like the theology of it, that's all. But then the next question is, okay, I think if we're going to be lay leaders in the church, we sort of have to wean ourselves away, I think, from this idea that we essentially are participating in, collaborating in. Like many organizations I know look for the endorsement of their bishop. I think we have to wean ourselves away from that. We're leaders in the church. And I'm not saying to freelance, that is, to act in defiance, but you don't need permission and you don't need endorsement. And I think we have to look, are we leaders or aren't we leaders? And if we're dependent on the hierarchy to say there's a leader and there isn't, we're basically giving up on the idea, in my opinion, of co-responsibility. It can be, it could be that the hierarchy doesn't usually give these endorsements. They don't even usually give, I mean, there isn't any member of the hierarchy that endorses the Institute for Church Life. I do work with bishops from time to time, but I don't have an endorsement. In some ways, not that I'm not looking for one. I don't mean to be flippant either. I want to give a classical example, I think, maybe. I think like a lot of these ideas were percolating right before the Second Vatican Council. It didn't come from nowhere. And if you read Dorothy Day's book, Loaves and Fishes, which I read recently because I had to give a talk on it for Saturdays with the Saints, and it moved me very deeply this time because it struck me as a kind of Eucharistic classic, and I had overlooked it as such. And she's got a chapter in there on spiritual advisors, where she talks about the relationship of her own movement to the priests, She talks a little bit about Cardinal Spellman. She says, you know, people say Cardinal Spellman should support me. Well, I never asked Cardinal Spellman support. I never asked for his permission. He didn't ask me to do this. And so, you know, I don't expect him to support me financially. To me, that's co-responsibility. Plus, that's the negative side of it. The positive side is exemplified in her relationship with priests, especially if you read in that chapter, her relationship with Father Pacifique Roy, who stayed with them for quite a while, who celebrated Mass for them every day, who gave little retreats every day sometimes, sometimes longer ones, who exercised a kind of pastoral governance or pastoral rule, which built up what Dorothy was doing. So that Dorothy's project wasn't just social action, it was a project in evangelization. Like she worked through her, the Catholic worker as she saw it, to evangelize. And I think there's a beautiful passage in there. We've sort of lost how to use this language, I think, but she talks about how sometimes the water in the cruet would freeze, but nevertheless it was so cold. But nevertheless, he celebrated Mass reverently, and at the elevation, acted. I forget the beautiful language he used. Acted slowly, as if lost in contemplation of the awfulness of the sacrifice. It's that sacrifice, in a sense, that binds us together. And look at the awfulness of the sacrifice. What is someone doing, in their lives, living out the Eucharistic life, that they'd be in a situation where the water at Mass would freeze in the cruets, and that they'd be working to evangelize in that setting, not building an organization, but becoming the Eucharistic body, as it were. And you see the co-responsibility there, right? The priesthood of the ordained, like Dorothy couldn't do those things for herself. None of us can, because we don't make the church. The priest did it. And it was ordered towards building up her, in this case, her project and the people in it. But neither of those two jobs could reduce to the other. So I think that some of it is we have to be willing to, to really be leaders, but not leaders in the sense that we're splitting off from the hierarchy or from the church, but let them do their thing. And we have to find ways of, I guess you could say, encouraging a co-responsible mindset among them, but we can't force it. But you know what? I see so many people, I don't see all your faces anymore, but I see a lot of you who are really inspiring, who have these ideals in their hearts, and who want to interpret them, to live them out, and to build up the body of Christ that way, to build up communio. That is living the life of the Trinity, friends. That is our bearing witness to it. None of us can account for someone else's, but insofar as we do it, it seems to me, we're leading. I know it's not a satisfactory answer, but nothing having to do with the faith is a satisfactory answer. In some ways, fully satisfactory to reason. Because it's not our thing. It's something that's given, and we're giving in return, right? We're giving ourselves in union with Christ. And there is a leadership mode in self-giving, but that's ironic. So it's never going to feel, you're going to always be tempted to want the comfort of a secular organization, something that goes with it in ecclesiastical disguise. Just give up on it. That's not what we're doing. I mean, I'm always thinking, how come I don't have a chaired professor? How come I don't have this? How come I don't have that? And I think, John, stop. That's not your worry. That's not your problem. You are about something different, and just stick to that. The world is about status. We're not.
Wow. Well, as we wrap up, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time here. So I was going to ask you, Dr. Cavadini, for one final farewell guidance for these finalists as they go on their next stage of this 10-week accelerator, but it sounds like you might have just given it there. So I don't know if you have any final words before we thank you so much for your time with us.
You know, I guess I don't have any, except maybe for this. I would like to say thank you. I do think that it's nice to be thanked. And one thing about lay leaders is they don't often get thanked a lot. And we're not in it to be thanked, but I would like to say thank you. I would like to say it to you all, because I know that the fast track to success in this life is not leadership in the church, one way or the other, especially lay leadership. And friends, we do it out of gratitude, don't we? We do it out of gratitude for that precious blood which is given to all of us and binds us together. We do it out of gratitude, but it's sometimes nice to hear that gratitude back. And so that is what I'd like to say in closing. I would like to say thank you all.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Cavadini, so much for joining us. And if it's fine with you, I'm sure a number of the finalists here would appreciate maybe taking a look again at some of those quotes you shared earlier. So I'm sure one of us, maybe John Herring, will be in touch.
If you email me, I'll send them to you. Or I can email them to you and you can send them out, whatever's easier. I'm around. If you email me, I'm here. That's what I'm here for.
Great. We'll turn it over maybe back to John Cannon or John Henry.
Okay. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Cavadini.
Thank you so much.
Yep. You're welcome so much.
All right, everyone. So I'm going to wrap up with a few closing thoughts. And then John Cannon, I think you're going to take closing prayer. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So Jason couldn't join us. So he's actually traveling to go see his grandmother. So his grandmother, he got a notice that his grandmother is taken very ill. So prayers for Jason, safe travel and good time with his family, and hopefully good recovery if possible. But so he asked us to speak in. And when I was thinking a lot about today, in the break period, one of the things I wanted to share with all of you guys was just know that we are praying for you, and know that we also need your prayers in this. And so as we're going through the next few weeks, I know that everybody on our team would greatly benefit by your prayers. And so I wanted to explicitly ask for them. So as we're trying to form this is the first time we're doing it. And so please be praying for us, and know that we will also be praying for all of you. And I would also just ask that you guys choose someone in here to pray for regularly, and share it or don't share it. Just if you find someone that you become attached to, this is where a lot of power, I think, will come. And then as you're all now Notre Dame students, there's some shorthand and some traditional stories to make sure that you're all a part of. And Father Hesburgh, one of the big figures, if you guys want to see a great documentary, there is a new Father Hesburgh documentary that was put out by one of the guys who made ESPN. He's actually now a development officer, so if you ever want to talk to him, maybe we could pull him in at the end. But Father Hesburgh just had a great prayer that was very simple, that was worth that he repeated just all the time. And I think